That is a Ugandan project, and I hope it succeeds.
Welcome to this analytical briefing. In this segment, we examine a series of thematic concepts articulated during Ambassador Otunnu's extensive engagement with the Uganda Media Center. Rather than reviewing surface-level campaign rhetoric, our focus is on unpacking the underlying policy frameworks, sociological observations, and institutional critics embedded within his commentary. By establishing an analytical baseline before listening to the verbatim audio, we can better evaluate the structural implications of his arguments regarding culture, technology, and governance.
And slowly, over a period of time, they agreed to step and support that formula.
Yes.
And that then got us out of the deadlock, and the General Assembly resumed.
First, we turn our attention to the intersection of local culture preservation, international perception. In standard media reporting, regions recovering from prolonged instability are typically characterized through a lens of institutional deficit. Otunnu challenges this reductionist framework by redirecting attention toward intangible heritage, specifically evaluating indigenous systems against established global standards of excellence. His commentary utilizes a specific cross-cultural comparison involving European diplomatic observation to illustrate how localized knowledge, botanical traditions, and culinary complexity hold a competitive status on the global stage. Rather than treating tradition as secondary, this perspective repositions local heritage as a sophisticated, self-sustaining asset. Let us listen to his evaluation of these cultural metrics.
Remember once, the French pride themselves, among other things, on being the leading cuisine in the world, you see? So when I encountered the French ambassador in Paris, I'd been ambassador to Uganda, I was involved with Joe Fiorema organizing a concert for him in Paris. When he learned I'd come from Uganda, he said, "Oh my goodness." Just before coming on vacation, I went up to a place called Gulu. The president wanted to meet all of us there. It was in the middle of the war. Right. And he said, I was shocked to discover that there's a little society in the middle of Africa whose cuisine is bigger, more varied, and more exquisite than the French cuisine. That coming from the French ambassador speaking about the cuisine of the Central Luo was mind-blowing. But it's true. It's true.
I'm interested in that cuisine. What's your favorite? What's your favorite meal from the Luo cuisine?
We are spoiled for choices because you've got Malakwang, you've got Dengo, Anbo, you've got La Koro, you've got Olel. What don't you have?
Second, the dialogue shifts toward macro-level systemic pressures and the impending disruptions of modern innovation. Contemporary governance is increasingly preoccupied with existential macro trends ranging from intractable interstate conflicts to the exponential expansion of artificial intelligence. However, systemic discourse often remains detached from the operational realities of local municipalities. Otunnu bridges this divide by examining how emerging digital architectures intersect with individual creative potential at the community level. He critiques the prevailing pedagogical disconnect within academic institutions, noting that systemic adoption requires more than high-level policy declarations. It requires structural preparation at the grassroots. The following excerpt details his perspective on integrating localized creativity into the global technological paradigm.
First, at this moment in world history, we have major intractable conflicts. Ukraine, Iran, Gaza. We've got the situation which is ongoing in parts of DRC. We've got Somalia. So we've got major conflicts that is shaking the world. That is keeping many world leaders awake because they are not clear their way out of those conflicts.
Right.
And those conflicts, as we know, impact the entire world.
Yeah.
See how the conflict in Iran has affected us at the petrol station and on the price of everything. So that is one. Two, we are entering a world where our economy will largely be shaped by a revolutionary, earth-shaking development, the full impact of which is only emerging now. Artificial intelligence.
Right.
Artificial intelligence.
Yes.
This is huge. But we do not yet know how best to marshal this force, which could be a big force for good. How to make this a public good. How to make it benefit most of the world and not only some of the world. How to make the little boy in Katwe under the mango tree be part of this, because it's about creativity. It's not about where you are located on the map. It's about creativity and what you can come up, and they can do earth-shaking things right here in Katwe.
Yeah.
So the development and the prospects of the dominance of artificial intelligence is a huge thing. I'm disappointed that in our country and maybe many parts of Africa, we have not yet come to the full realization of the import of this.
Right.
When I go to schools and universities here and I'll speak about artificial intelligence, they still look at me as scans. We need to change this. So how we work out a regime, an arrangement, a system for marshalling, the benefits of artificial intelligence, make it a public good, make it accessible to most countries and most people, and not let it dominate us.
Finally, we analyze a critical structural audit of international development mandates, drawing directly from historical participation in multilateral policy formulation. Global initiatives such as the Millennium Development Goals frequently originate from high-level consensus carrying universal humanitarian and educational objectives. However, Otunnu provides a candid institutional post-mortem concerning the operational friction that occurs during regional implementation. His analysis highlights a recurring systemic failure when international bodies decree broad policy shifts without synchronizing local capital investment, infrastructure readiness, and preliminary planning. Well-intentioned directives can inadvertently undermine existing institutional stability. In this final excerpt, he outlines the structural consequences of failing to properly bridge global ambitions with community-level execution.
Right. It's what I call the global, from the global to the community, and from the community to the global. We haven't got that right yet.
Right.
Let me give you an example.
Yes.
I was very involved with what came to be called Millennium Development Goals. Among them, universal primary education, universal secondary education. We're very proud of that. I was a small group that designed that. But when I went to some countries and saw the impact, what had actually happened, I regret it. Countries that planned and invested ahead of time before unveiling universal primary education, they did well.
Right.
But countries that thought, well, the UN is now decreed that there should be universal primary education, so there shall be. Secondary school will be free. No planning, no investment. What they had, even though it was not universal, collapsed. In its place, nothing took over. That's a good example of well-intended aspirations, well-intended standards, well-intended ambitions at the global level, but not well managed in transmitting this to the community, the national level where the action takes place, the mismatch, a disconnect, and then our good intentions turn into
These three thematic segments collectively underscore a recurring structural motive within Otunnu's discourse: the perpetual tension between macro-level international ideals and ground-level municipal execution. Whether addressing global violation of indigenous culture, auditing academic readiness of technological shifts, or evaluating the long-term consequences of multilateral educational decrees, the underlying thesis emphasizes that systemic success depends entirely on localized structural alignment. This concludes our analytical framing for this sequence of discussions. Thank you.